Hello everybody, welcome back for another video. Today we're going to be talking about the mystery of the Carolina Bays and how this phenomena potentially ties in to a few other events of interest, which will be revealed later on in this video. So first let's learn about the Carolina Bays. What are the Carolina Bays? It all starts in the 1930s. So during the 1930s, the first aerial photographs were being taken, and while they were photographing the East Coast, they noticed all of these elliptical depressions, all the way from southern New Jersey all the way down to northern Florida. But the greatest concentration of these were in North and South Carolina and Georgia. And these are what is referred to as the Carolina Bays. So let's read a bit more here. And the term bay, it's actually in reference to the variety of bay trees that grow in and around these depressions. So you would probably think, the bay is referencing a body of water, but it's actually referencing the bay trees that grow in and around these elliptical depressions. Carolina Bays, they're consistently oval in shape and occur in clusters with sizes ranging from a couple to several thousand acres, so they can get pretty big. Most of them are vegetated wetlands that fill with rainwater in the winter and spring and dry in the summer months. Now, this is a big point here. Every single one of them is invariably aligned in the same direction, similar alignments. All Carolina display a marked alignment in the northwest to southeast direction. And let me show you a graphic of that. This is just North Carolina here. Here's the state demarcation line. This is obviously South Carolina. But they all have this same orientation, so northwest by southeast. And here's just some of them that people are trying to figure out where they're pointing to. But let's learn a bit more. Let's get back to the article here. Okay, so theories. What caused these Carolina Bays? So in the 40s and 50s, the speculation was that a swarm of meteorites slammed into the Atlantic coast. But modern research showed that the depressions are too shallow to be impact craters, and none of them contain the usual geological evidences of extraterrestrial origin. No meteorite fragments. Bottom line, nobody can explain them. And it's estimated that there's once as many as 500,000 of these Carolina Bays along the Atlantic coast, but only a few hundred have survived or have been preserved. Majority of them naturally eroded, others destroyed by farming, logging, and housing developments. And not surprising. So I believe where was this? I believe this is in North Carolina. But you've got all these elliptical bays of various sizes, and sometimes they overlap, and portions of them will fill with water. But yeah, some of them are still around. And here we go. And again, they share an alignment. And here are some more, and some of the bigger ones are considered lakes. Here's a nice photo of one. A body of water inside of it. So I just want to bring up a few more characteristics of these Carolina Bays that I didn't touch on. They are shallow depressions with the maximum depth 50 feet. Most of them aren't even 20 feet. Many bays have elevated sandy rims, which is probably going to be brought up later. Carolina bays, they frequently overlap other bays without destroying the morphology of either depression. And sometimes when these bays overlap, they'll form this heart-shaped pattern. Somebody just highlighted in red here. This is in one of the Carolinas. And no new bays appear to be forming. And this is a big point. Bays occur only in unconsolidated sediment. So what's unconsolidated sediment? Found a little from the USGS, United States Geological Service, so hopefully they should know. Unconsolidated sediments are just loose materials, ranging from clay to sand to gravel. So you've got your different types of soils here. Groundwater flows through the spaces between the grains. So earthquakes, for example, can liquefy unconsolidated sediments. So it just has to be porous. Water, it has to be saturated by water for the liquefaction to occur. So not consolidated sediments, you won't have liquefaction here. So consolidated sediments, they're just essentially solid rock. So pretty much rock. Everything else is potentially liquefiable. So that is about it with that. I wanted to surf a little bit here, some of the Carolina bays. And let's take a look at some of the ones outside of Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. And here you go. Again, you have a whole slew of them, various sizes, some overlapping. Not quite the heart pattern, but you have some more here, all various sizes. And yeah, the entire Carolinas, there are quite a few of these still around. So now let's take a look at Bladden Lakes State Forest, North Carolina. Here's one. Here's a bigger one with some water in it. And here's one. And here's like another one that's overlapping it a bit. But just a couple more examples, and I think I just want to show you two more. Polk County, North Carolina. Here's a bigger one, relatively big one. Here's some smaller ones, and here's some bigger ones. And again, they have a general alignment. And I just want to show you the last one. This is, some are considered lakes. The largest, Carolina Bay, or at least it's considered the largest, is Lake Waccamaw in North Carolina. And this bay is 7 miles long. So some of them can be pretty sizable. So I think that is it for that. So there was a kind of a development in the case of the Carolina Bays. In 2001, there was a discovery, and that discovery came from Nebraska, of all places. What finally somebody realized in Nebraska, there were a lot of what are very similar to Carolina Bays, these elliptical depressions in clusters with an alignment consistent with all the other ones in their area. And they call these rainwater basins in Nebraska. So they don't call it, obviously, the bay tree, it doesn't grow in or around these, but they call them rainwater basins in Nebraska. And now these are all pointing in a similar direction. So now you had here in Nebraska, they're all pointing, these ones are all pointing to the northeast. And over here, these ones are all pointing to the northwest. And they all they're trying to figure out, where the central point of origin is. So a new theory arose as to what caused all this, and that theory is called the glacier ice impact hypothesis, and this is probably the most popular idea now, or a hypothesis, sorry. Now this hypothesis, it relies on the fact that thousands of years ago there was this Laurentide ice sheet. So some of the United States and most of Canada was covered by a giant ice sheet, and they're saying a meteorite hit this ice sheet roughly around the Great Lakes area, and that impact ejected ice boulders, and these ice boulders came in at an angle. Oblique impacts of ice boulders on viscous surfaces created slanted conical cavities, elliptical bays, basically. Yeah, and so that's why they're saying that there's no trace of, since it was ice boulders that hit it, they just eventually, all traces of those ice boulders are gone, and all you're left with is the bays. But they have graphs and equations, and I don't even believe there were glaciers until recently, and that's crazy to think, but I have my reasons. But this is the popular hypothesis at this time, and I just wanted to bring up too. So not only did they find some in Nebraska, they found some in Kansas, New Mexico, and Texas, and they all, the Carolina bays are the largest amount of these elliptical depressions, but they find them sparsely in these other states as well, with Nebraska having slightly more than the rest of these, but they're all seemingly pointing in a certain direction, somewhere to the north. So now I'd like to talk about what I think may have happened here. Okay, now to introduce some of my own speculation into this phenomena of the Carolina bays. Just looking at this graphic here, I couldn't help noticing the midpoint of Carolina bays and the Nebraska rainwater basins. There was a pretty significant event that occurred right in this area, and it's actually considered one of the most destructive events in the United States history, and it's called the New Madrid earthquakes of 1811 and 1812, and this is the epicenter. So you've got right at this midpoint between all of this phenomena, you have the worst earthquake in American history. Is that a coincidence? Let's take a look at this New Madrid earthquake. And again, you get your Carolinas and Georgia, the states of Georgia and the Carolinas, north and south. They fall nicely in the path of the shock waves, in addition to all those Carolina bays. So New Madrid earthquake of 1811 and 12. Worst earthquake in American history, shook the country on December 16th, 1811, beginning series of 3 major earthquakes in the Mississippi River Valley. Shock waves recorded from Canada to the Gulf Coast, and there were accounts of chimneys that came crashing down in Maine. The quake caused huge cracks in the Earth's surface. Fissures large and small ejected coal and sand into the air. When you get liquefaction, sand tends to come bubbling up, or sometimes even comes out as a fountain, depending on the force. In the known history of the world, no other earthquakes have lasted so long or produced so much evidence of damage as the New Madrid earthquakes. And some of the phenomena, sand boils, the world's largest sand boils, were created by the New Madrid earthquakes. And recent sand blows dot the landscape surrounding New Madrid. Just kind of give you a feel for what can be left behind by this process. And people report hearing loud thunder, sounds of distant thunder and loud explosions. There were sonic booms, also known as Seneca booms, heard at many earthquake sites. So during all these earthquakes, people report like artillery fire or sounds of cannons during and preceding these earthquakes. And I think I've got a short video for you. Now let's take a look at this phenomena called the Seneca guns. And again, this is possibly what people are hearing during these earthquakes or these events where people are describing here the sounds of artillery fire or loud guns. This is possibly an example of that, and this is in 2014 in Canada. So there's going to be two booms, two of these sounds, and this is going to be the first one. Okay, so that was the first sound, first boom, and here is the second one. And there you have the second one. So, and again, there was no warships in the area firing artillery or anything. It was reported as being a mystery. No one really knew what was causing it. And there's various explanations given, but this phenomenon has been going on for at least since the mid to late 1800s, and people have been reporting hearing this sounds of artillery or gunfire prior and during earthquakes. So I just wanted to bring this to light. Now these earthquakes were preceded by the Great Comet of 1811, and some called it Tecumseh's Comet in the United States or North America, and others called it was known as Napoleon's Comet in Europe, and it was estimated to measure 1,000,000 miles across from head to tail, and was very visible in the night sky. And the comet was accompanied by a solar eclipse that year before the earthquakes. There was also accounts of strange lights. Many accounts of flashes, glows, and fires in the sky were recorded during the New Madrid earthquakes. And this is an interesting picture. This is pillars of light ascending from the earth this is in Mansfield, Ohio in 2014. Very similar to some of the accounts given before the New Madrid earthquake of 1811. That is an interesting phenomenon right there. So I speculate that the actual there was some event. The comet somehow triggered all of this phenomena, and it was centered here in the New Madrid area, causing all these earthquakes. And I don't know, somehow it also caused all of these Carolina Bays and Nebraska basins and some of the other elliptical depressions around here in Kansas and New Mexico and Texas. I believe it's all tied in together, and I don't know the actual mechanism, but it has something to do with the comet of 1811, and possibly it changed the atmospheric conditions, but I don't think this was just a random earthquake. And you had all these shock waves and liquefaction going on, so I think it's all tied together. And there's another observation we can make about these Carolina bays as well. Another observation that can be made is when you're looking into the Carolina bays, you realize that the majority of them are concentrated in obviously North, South Carolina, Georgia, Virginia, so primarily southern states. So I thought, you know what, let me just take a little bit of digging into the American Civil War, because I'm Canadian, by the way, and I'm aware of the Civil War, but I've never really made any kind of study out of it. And I was surprised to learn that much of the southern United States were destroyed during the Civil War. Farms, plantations burned down, and their crops destroyed. There was actually a rebuilding of the South after the Civil War called the Reconstruction. And this reconstruction of the South lasted 12 years. So in the Civil War, it was the southern states that actually absorbed most of the physical damage. All of I shouldn't say all, most of the destroyed cities are southern cities. And there's just another little, ask a historian on Quora. How did the Civil War leave the South after its end? The South was left in ruins with most major cities destroyed. Half of the southern railways were destroyed. Rails were heated up and bent around trees. We'll look into this a little bit further. 85% of southern church bells were destroyed. I'll talk about that in another video. There are hundreds of small towns that were completely destroyed. The South was decimated and everybody in the South suffered. So the South lost the war, obviously, but they also experienced almost all of the significant damage to the cities. And what I just wanted to do is show you some pictures of some of the destroyed cities. Columbia, South Carolina, and just extreme scenes of destruction. And we'll just kind of go through some of these here. Richmond, Virginia, and just obviously not much left of some of these buildings. And what's this one? Atlanta, Georgia. And what's interesting too is I've seen damage like this when previous video talking about the Halifax explosion of 1917. These shock waves roll through, and you have structures that look like this as well. Just a note on that. For Virginia, Fredericksburg. So at this point, I'm wondering, well, is it possible? I already questioned Civil War as to the true causes of it. And here's obviously another one from Charleston, South Carolina. So the thought kind of came to me that, well, could the damage that was done to the South, supposedly by the North, could it be that this damage was all done during this time period of 1811, 1812, during these massive earthquakes and also these Carolina bays? Because I think there's destructive, where you see those Carolina bays, shock waves are close by, from what I've seen, and I'll present some evidence on that, but let me show you some more pictures here. And where's this? This is Richmond, Virginia. Yeah, Richmond took a lot of hits, and this is an interesting one. Again, Richmond. There's massive amounts of destruction. So it's my speculation that these Carolina bays are part of a destructive event, and they're associated with shock waves. And I make that statement have a little bit of to back that up. During the expedition to the Tunguska Ground Zero site, there was an expedition. There's a few of them. 1929 expedition. I think it was the second one went out, and they were looking at the Ground Zero. I believe they call it the cauldron. But within the cauldron, there's a couple areas, and one's called the Southern Swamp. And when they drained that portion of the swamp, they drained the swamp, and they found these peculiar flat holes. And they were looking for meteorite fragments, but what they found were these depressions. And it turned out that they found these elliptical depressions. And here's a bigger shot of it. So when they drained the swamp, because it filled with water, they found all these smaller elliptical depressions. So the energy that affected the Tunguska area, it had all these elliptical depressions that we see in the Carolina Bays. And I can't tell if they're oriented here, but it's just, I think it's, and of course there was massive devastation and shockwaves associated with Tunguska, like millions of trees just destroyed. So when I see the South with all its damage, I can't help wondering if these also had a part to play in that, as well as the earthquakes. Now that's just my speculation. There's no way for me to prove that, but I think this is all tied together. And I should mention too that all these Carolina Bays and rainwater basins, they tell us there's no way that these could be made any earlier than 12,900 years ago. That is like the official version of history. That's the earliest date they will consider. So I just wanted to mention that to you. And I don't think these are much older than, 200 years? A little over 200 years old. The last point I wanted to touch on with regards to the Civil War is the railways. And when I was reading this, it said half of the southern railways were destroyed. Rails were heated up and bent around trees. So it is interesting, where you have all these earthquakes in the New Madrid event of 1811 and 12, that you have all this destruction in southern states, and you have all these railways which are destroyed. And I should mention that this was all implemented by this person, General William Tecumseh Sherman. And you see here he's doing his hidden hand sign. And his superior was General Ulysses S. Grant. And he's doing the same hand sign, and he goes on to become the 18th President of the United States. But one of the tactics that General Sherman is known for is, it's named after him, Sherman's neckties, and it was a railway destruction tactic used in the Civil War. And he basically just outlined, or he implemented a tactic where he had his men destroy all the railways by heating them up until they were malleable and twisting them into loops resembling neckties. Now when you look at photos, you see, there's some men standing around destroyed railways, and here's some bent railways, but the actual tying of these railways around trees, when you start looking for that, you find cartoons, right? And if I do some more images, there's current pictures of these railways bent around trees, but I can't really find any old pictures of railways tied around trees, but you can find drawings of it. And again, they say they bent some of them into the shapes of S's. And I can find new pictures, more recent pictures of that, but I can't find old pictures of that. And again, we've got a drawing showing this phenomena. And the reason why I find this whole phenomena of the insistence of Sherman to destroy all of the railways in this manner by heating them up and bending them, the reason why that's of interest to me is because during earthquakes, you get this phenomena where railway tracks, they get heated up and they get bent into all kinds of interesting shapes. And this is an Alaska earthquake, New Zealand, I can't pronounce that, but so you have all of this interesting things that happen during earthquakes, and this is one of them. With these tracks, they get bent and reshaped. 1906 San Francisco. So it's just interesting to me that this phenomena that happens during earthquakes, where you have shock waves, right? That where the metal gets heated up and it twists into various shapes. You also have, this General Sherman deciding he wanted the railways heated up and bent, and we're told they're bent around trees, but all they show us are cartoons of that. So it's just really, again, this proves nothing, right? But you have something you would expect to see during an earthquake, because as we've seen it, you also saw it only in the South, right? You saw it in the South, as well as all the destroyed cities, which I would expect to see in earthquakes and with events associated with shock waves. So it's just another aspect that makes me question the official narrative. I think what's actually going on is you had these earthquakes and these shock waves causing all this damage to cities and the railways, and the whole Civil War and the Sherman's neckties, it's just all more or less one big cover story. But that's just my opinion. I can't really prove it, but I can just kind of poke some holes in it. So now I kind of want to move the focus over to Russia. Next, we're going to talk about Russia and these thaw lakes, or as they're also called, thermokarst lakes. And what these are, they are usually shallow depressions formed by thawing ice-rich permafrost. So sometimes these are filled with water, sometimes they're not, and we're told that they are created by ice-rich permafrost, thawing ice-rich permafrost. And I came across these in an earlier video, and I just want to revisit them because I think these tie in to the Carolina Bays. I think it's the same phenomena. And this is just a picture of these thaw lakes, and as you can see, there's a lot of them. And they happen to, sometimes they're filled with water, and sometimes they're not. So these would just be thaw depressions, and these would be thaw lakes. And the way this all came about was I started looking into these defensive fortifications called redoubts, and I was looking specifically at a couple of star forts, Now these star forts are in Siberia. Oh, this one is. And there's another one I was looking at. I believe it's in northern Kazakhstan. But this is the one in Siberia. And down here, you could kind of see the outline of this defensive fortification. And it's mentioned in the literature, Wikipedia, that these redoubts are usually part of a bigger structure, and there's usually like a fort that's connected to the star fort. And somebody brought it to my attention that there's a really good researcher who actually did a video on this. And let me see if I can pull it up. Here it is: Star Forts, Hedgehogs, and More Washington Proof. I'm not sure to pronounce that, but I'll leave a link to this video. It's a great video. I recommend checking it out. But one of the things he shows is you have, this redoubt, the smaller star fort, if you will, and it's actually attached to this structure, but it's all connected to this star fort. So going back to Google Earth, so here we have that redoubt, the star fort, and where you would expect to find the rest of the structure, now you have this circular thaw lake. And it just so happens, by the way, that this particular thaw lake isn't even a freshwater lake. This is salt water. What's left of this village has to get their water imported. But the official version states that this is a natural occurrence by melting permafrost, and it was created about 1,000 years ago. But the speculation is that this was a deliberate destruction of all these star forts. And there's a second one I want to show you. Okay, and here was the second one. This one's in northern Kazakhstan, but again, you have the fort, you have the remnants. Here you have a village, but where you might expect to have the rest of the body of this star fort, now you have like a giant thaw lake. So how does this all connect potentially to the Carolina Bays? We're going to take a look at some of the characteristics of Carolina Bays and match them up with these thaw lakes in Siberia. So what are some of these characteristics of the Carolina Bays? We talked about the fact that bays are shallow depressions, typically no deeper than 50 feet. And by definition, these thaw lakes, thaw depressions, by definition, they're usually shallow. And so that's one characteristic that's similar. Now, many of the Carolina Bays have sandy rims, and they frequently overlap each other without destroying the morphology of either depression. So let's take a look at the first one. Many bays have elevated sandy rims. Let's take a look at these thaw lakes and see if we can find sandy rims. So this is the one star fort. Now this was actually in northern Kazakhstan, this one, but it's very close to the Siberian border, and this one has a sandy rim. Here's another one, sandy rim, and again, you're going to find that these sandy rims are typically oriented in the same location of the lake. So let's see, sandy rim and this is obviously north, so we're looking at northeast. The sandy rims are all on the northeast side. Here we go, sandy rim, sandy rim. more sandy rims, north inner. Typically, so it's implying a directionality, and that's another element of the Carolina Bays is they share an alignment. Now these aren't elliptical, but just by the similar placement of these or location of the sandy rims, you can kind of get a feel that whatever energy is at work here, it seems to be directional in this case as well as the Carolina Bays. So again, a lot of these have sandy rims, and they all seem to be pointing in the same direction. Now, this there will be some that don't have sandy rims, but I'm just pointing out, there definitely appear to be some that have sandy rims. So that's one connection. Now, can we find some that are overlapping? I believe we can. Do you remember the heart-shaped pattern that I showed earlier in the video that formed a heart? And really all it is two, in the case of the Carolina Bays, it was just two elliptical formations on top of each other. Here you have a heart. This is in northern Kazakhstan, close to the Siberian border. And here's another one, overlapping, and I think I had a third one here somewhere. There it is. Okay, so we have these heart-shaped overlapping elliptical formations, and this is in near the Siberian border in Kazakhstan. So we have sandy rims on some of them. We have overlapping elliptical shapes. What else can we see if we can compare? Oh, we also have shallow, they're all shallow depressions. Some are filled with water, some aren't. And I think that's a good start. And I think another key point, obviously, with the Carolina Bays is they occur in clusters, sometimes linear arrays, and in complex clusters. Well, I think we can check that one off the list as well. I mean, if this isn't a cluster, I don't know what is. So in this case, we have circular shapes, we have some elliptical shapes, and we have just some random shapes, but we have all these similar characteristics, and a lot of these have an alignment. Not all of them, but a lot of them are sharing an alignment, which is also a characteristic of the Carolina Bays. But you don't get as many of the true elliptical shapes as you do in the Carolina Bays. So, some interesting evidences here, but again, maybe these are created by melting permafrost. So is there an example of ovals and elliptical shapes and circular shapes anywhere else in the world where there isn't permafrost? Well, I'm glad you asked, even though you didn't. Let's look at an example of this phenomena in Australia, of all places. So here we are in southwestern Australia, and again, where straight up is north. So all of these depressions, and most of these aren't filled with water, but there's a few that are considered lakes. Most of these are pointing northeast. These ones just so happen to be pointing northeast. And so they share an alignment. Some of them are more elliptical, a lot of oval shapes, but there's some circular shapes as well mixed in. And so that's kind of interesting. All the way in Australia, and I don't recall any melting of permafrost or ice sheets. And there's some circles in there, and there's even, I believe, a heart-shaped bay here. Here's an overlapping, couple of overlapping elliptical shapes forming a heart shape. So we have heart shapes forming in the Siberia, Kazakhstan region. In Australia, we have it on the in United States with the Carolina bays. We have elliptical patterns in alignment. We have shallow depressions. None of these are very deep. They're all less than 50 feet. And let's see, this is Australia 2, and there's more of these. Let's see, Australia 3. Very creative naming on my part. But again, here we go. Again, pointing in the northeast for the most part. Some more elliptical shapes, some more circular shapes. And some of these are a lot bigger, but they're maintaining an orientation. And again, you got a mixture of all kinds of different shapes, but there's an orientation going on that's very consistent. And you got a mix of circular, oval shapes, and it's just really interesting stuff that I've never heard about. And was there one more? Australia 4. Oh, I was going to mention this as another heart-shaped one, but it's a little broken, so it kind of looks more like bunny ears. But you have overlapping bays, or overlapping elliptical shapes, sorry. And again, there's an orientation about these that is just a little northeast in this case. So, and just for reference here, there's Perth, Australia. So we're in obviously the southwest portion of Australia. So please, feel free to explore this for yourselves. And they're not that hard to find. So I think this is all related. I think this is one phenomena that's causing all these shapes. Sometimes they're elliptical, sometimes they're more oval, sometimes they're circular, and sometimes they're just a mess of, a mess. But I think it's all related. And going back to Siberia for a second, I just want to bring up, I talked about the trees in Siberia. There's an absence of old trees in a very thin, fertile layer, which is observed in almost all the forests of the Urals and Siberia. And when you take a look at these old photos from the Tunguska area in Siberia, where there was that great explosion in 1908, it appears that even in 1908, these forests were extremely young, very young trees that are being displayed in these photographs. By no means a mature forest. And the person who wrote this blog, he's just saying he's kind of reiterating that he's saying it's very clearly seen in all the photos that the forest is quite young, not more than 100 years old. Let me remind you that the Tunguska meteorite, well, I don't think it was a meteorite, but it occurred in 1908. So if there was a previous large-scale catastrophe that destroyed forests in Siberia that occurred, he's speculating, 1815, by 1908, the forest should look exactly like it does in the photos. And I think this ties in really well with the time frame I'm looking at, the Great Comet of 1811, 1812. There was a lot of destruction in the United States, and I believe the Civil War, the events that were being described during the Civil War. I think a lot of that destruction occurred shortly after the comet arrived, and I believe that destruction of these forests occurred right around the same time frame as displayed by these young forests. And I think I showed when they drained the swamp, one of the swamps in the epicenter of the Tunguska explosion, they noticed all these elliptical and oval depressions. And the Tunguska explosion is obviously associated with millions of trees being destroyed. So there's an association with these elliptical, oval shapes and destruction. So when you take a look back at Siberia and you notice that there's all these shallow depressions, which I think I've kind of I tried to demonstrate that they're associated with the Carolina Bays. I believe that all of this was caused during an event which probably happened right around between 1810 and 1820, somewhere in that range. And I believe it's all the destruction that occurred with the forest is because of the event that caused these. That's what I'm saying. Whew, okay, covered a lot of ground. There's just two more things I want to show you real quick. And what I wanted to cover next, just briefly, is the mystery of the Namibian fairy circles. So, in the desert of Namibia, they discovered these circular patterns, and they are in clusters. There are all these circular patterns and oval patterns, kind of just like we've been observing with what the depressions in Siberia and in Australia. And there are just all of these circles that are in clusters, and I believe it is over 1,100 miles, I believe. Yeah, the fairy circles evenly sprinkle across 1,100 miles in the Namibian desert. All of these circles. So I just thought that was interesting, considering how we're talking about all these, elliptical bays and shallow depressions all over the world. And again, these are in clusters. So I don't know what the soil is made out of here, but these aren't depressions, but it's interesting nonetheless. And what they speculated here was that these are all caused by termites. And there was a paper written on it and everything, and I saw a documentary literally talking about it and saying that they figured it out. It was colonies of termites forming these. But then there was another more recent study that came out, and they're saying that these fairy circles are probably not caused by termites, but instead it's caused by grasses that are competing with each other for water. But what's interesting is when I took a look at this photo, you got some oval shapes, some circular shapes. I noticed you have a heart shaped here, and you have a heart shape here. So what are the odds of that? And again, you have some overlapping ones here, and again with the heart shaped overlapping. So what are the odds? You have this, I think, the same energy that created all the Carolina Bays and what you saw in Siberia without as much. Well, maybe there was some destruction event here, who knows, but you have clusters of these circular, oval, and overlapping patterns. But it doesn't end here. Mysterious fairy circles discovered in the Australian outback. So they found more of these in the Australian outback. And where is this? On Monday, a group of researchers released a report saying they had now located the same formations in the Australian outback in the Pilbara region. And this is in 2016, so only a couple of years ago. So they're just saying here, yeah, the latest report shows the phenomena is due to thirsty plants organizing themselves in an effort to source water in a dry landscape. I mean, isn't it weird that they can't consider the possibility that all of these clusters of shapes might have the same source? But instead they're looking at termites and thirsty plants. So I just wanted to point this out, and it's an interesting phenomena, and I think it might relate even to what we saw with the bays and the thaw lake. So I guess I'll leave it here for now. Sorry for taking so much of your time, but there was a lot to cover. So until next time, take care. Bye.